If there is a book that carries the spirit of defiance, unshakable faith, and victories that seemed impossible, yet was placed out of sight for many generations, it is First Maccabees, and I know that its return today is not accidental, but an answer to the hunger of souls longing for light. I clearly sense in every forgotten page the vibration of a people standing at the brink of extinction, who chose to keep the covenant rather than bow before foreign idols. When you read this memory again, you will not only see a record of history, but also the mirror of your own soul reflected there. For outside, it may be Antiochus, but inside it is the shadow of compromise. You once allowed to occupy the temple of your heart. Centuries ago, religious leaders removed First Maccabees from the Western Bible. In the name of preserving the purity of the Hebrew text, they discarded the voice of pages soaked in blood and tears. But I look deeper and see it as the image of a soul choosing the narrow way while forgetting the parts considered unnecessary. My experience shows me that no truth can ever remain buried forever. What is hidden will return at the right time, and when you open your heart to listen, the old fragments will connect into a complete picture. I have often said in many readings that when a people forget their roots, their soul will create events to awaken memory. And First Maccabees is such an event in biblical memory, reminding humanity that no power can extinguish the light. If within there still burns a faithful flame, you may ask why the Ethiopians still keep this book in their canon, and I see the answer in their loyalty to the stream of tradition. They did not chase the convenience of reform, but chose to preserve the treasure as it was. That act of preservation shows that Scripture is not only text, but also the heartbeat of a community. To read First Maccabees is not to satisfy curiosity, but to look into yourself, for its story reminds you that in events which seem meaningless, there is still an unseen hand weaving the pattern of the soul. In hours of prayer, I see that the silence between Old and New Testament, where this book resides, is not emptiness, but the stillness necessary to prepare for a new revelation. The soul is the same. When you do not hear an answer immediately, it is not the absence of God, but the time to learn how to listen to the whisper within. First Maccabees begins with the scene of Alexander the Great and the division of Greek power, but in deeper vision I see it as the symbol of powerful ideas spreading across life, dissolving personal identity, and leaving the soul before a choice: either assimilate for comfort or keep the covenant and accept exclusion. Outer history and inner story always run side by side. Thus, when I read of the cruelty of Antiochus, I do not only see a Greek king, but also the image of inner habits, denying faith, turning the temple into a place for idols of ambition and fear. When one asked me if the light of faith could survive such brutality, I simply smiled and said it is precisely when the darkness is thickest that the inner light is most clear. That forbidden book is in fact a mirror held before your soul, asking if the temple is defiled. What will you do? If the law of God is forbidden, what choice will you make? If difference makes you reject it, will you still keep the covenant? These questions do not belong only to the past. They belong to your very present moment. I see that the reason First Maccabees returns to attention today is because the collective soul faces the same choice: to assimilate with the trend or to keep the unique light of faith. The message for you is not only to know that this book exists, but to use it as the test of your own soul. Right now, you can rebuild the inner temple, dismantle the strange idols you unknowingly set up, and relight the lamp you thought had gone out. That forbidden book was written in blood and fidelity, but also in hope. Hope that in every generation there would be those who hear the call of the covenant. I recount it not for you to praise the past, but for you to realize that the present demands the same choice. And when you choose to keep faith, you become the continuation of a story that has never been forgotten. The canonical veil is not merely about scholars debating words, but a mirror reflecting how the human soul selects what to keep and what to leave out. When the Reformation erupted, many leaders sought to bind the Bible tightly to the Hebrew text, and the result was that First Maccabees and other so-called apocryphal books were pushed aside. They regarded them as unnecessary excess, like a room too full of objects that must be cleared for neatness, yet the neatness of reason discarded the breadth of soul memory. I see in human records that whenever a community narrows the criteria for measuring truth, they cut off part of the energy that nourishes their spirit. The Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions understood that the value of those books lies not only in history, but in the sacred power of testimony to faith under trial. They kept them because their soul recognized that without them, the chain of redemption loses a vital link. The Ethiopian tradition went further, weaving First Maccabees directly into the sacred fabric and treating it as inseparable from salvation history. Thus we see different views, one side using the ruler of scholars to revise, the other using the intuition of community to preserve, both with reasons. But when I listen to the echo of the soul, I know that collective memory cannot erase what carries true energy needed for the journey. I've often said, no truth is buried forever. Like a seed beneath hard soil, it'll break through in its season to find the light. So with First Maccabees, removed from the canon, yet remembered in generations through festivals, stories, and the survival of the community, many ask me if this is only theological debate, and I answer that it is a lesson in choosing ideals. For whenever you neglect a part of memory, you live in deficiency without knowing. When a community chooses narrow criteria, they think it preserves purity. Yet true purity is not exclusion, but purification with inclusion. The memory of the soul never loses the necessary stories, for each carries a vibration, and that vibration will return when humanity is ready to receive. That is why today people are curious again about the forbidden book. It is a sign that the collective soul needs, reminding that freedom of faith is not a gift without cost, but the result of steadfastness and sacrifice. I see clearly that setting the book aside did not diminish its power. Rather, it turned it into an underground flame burning through the centuries. And whenever a generation faces pressure to assimilate, that flame rises again, reminding them that once a people stood firm to guard their covenant. I feel in every line the heartbeat of thousands who lived and died for faith. And when that heartbeat reaches your ear, it does not ask if you are Catholic, Orthodox, or Ethiopian. It only asks if you will choose to keep the light when darkness surrounds. The canonical veil humans raised is only an academic curtain. The true veil is where you hide yourself. Sometimes you exclude painful experiences from memory, not wanting to face them. But soul memory never loses them. They will return in dreams, in intuition, or in unexpected encounters to remind you that wholeness is healing. Thus, the lesson of First Maccabees lies not only in its content, but also in its fate. It teaches that what is cast out will return to complete the picture, and it invites you not to cut off parts of your soul by denying what you dislike, but to let them be integrated and purified. When I close my eyes and read the stream of history, I see that canonical disputes are only outward signs. The deeper reality is that the human soul is learning to choose lasting ideals over short-term convenience. And in that choice, each individual has a part. Therefore, when you hear that First Maccabees was excluded, remember that you too have parts of memory once pushed aside. And like that book, they will return when you are ready to look straight at them and learn your lesson. The silence between the two covenants was not the emptiness of absence, but the intentional stillness in which the seed of a new era was buried, awaiting its day to sprout. First Maccabees arose precisely during this silence that covered the history of Judah, when the voices of the prophets had ceased and the long silence stretched like a dark night, leading people to believe that God had departed. But when I look deeper, I see that this was the waiting room where the soul was being prepared for a great transformation. Greek culture spread like a flood. Alexander carried philosophy, art, and mythology into every land. And when the empire broke into pieces and power was divided among generals, Judah was caught between clashing forces. They lived under the pressure of assimilation, their identity thinned day by day, and the temptation of foreign language and thought became a sweet drug, leading many to willingly abandon their roots. Then came Antiochus Epiphanes, who made faith his direct target by forbidding circumcision, forbidding the keeping of Sabbath, forbidding the reading of the law, and even desecrating the temple itself with idols and defiled sacrifices. History records this as political action, but I see it as the ultimate test placed before the soul of a nation to reveal if they were ready to keep the covenant at any cost. The silence between Old and New Testament was not merely centuries without prophecy written down. It was an inner process where the collective heart learned to hear the whisper. When the strong voice of the prophet ceased, people had to seek the echo of God in inner silence. And within that silence, destiny was being planted. I have seen many souls in readings struggle in prayer when no immediate answer came, thinking heaven was closed, but truly it was the pause needed to learn to distinguish the echo of fear from the whisper of God. First Maccabees shows that this silence was not abandonment but preparation. Alexander and his successors may have conquered culturally, but in so doing they created the very setting in which the faith of Judah was tested by fire and became stronger than ever. In the darkness of Antiochus's oppression, when every reasonable path led to assimilation, faith was forced to root deeper to avoid being torn out. Intuitively, I see this as the law of life. When the outside noise is too loud to hear instruction, God withdraws within and whispers in the heart. And only those who sit still can hear. In your life also there are silences when doors seem closed, when no clear direction is visible, when prayers seem to vanish into nothing, yet in that very moment, destiny's seed is rooting quietly, like wheat buried in winter soil that seems dead, but is preparing for a new harvest. First Maccabees is a mirror of silence, rightly used in history. With no public prophecy, the people had to keep the law in their hearts, teach it secretly to their children, and become witnesses in daily life without relying on external voices. I tell you that the silence in your own life will also demand this. You must become your own prophet. You must take the flame into your hands rather than wait for another to bring it. When Greek culture swept over everything, it was like modern ideas constantly inviting you to assimilate for an easier life, telling you to drop rituals, abandon discipline, let go of identity in exchange for acceptance. And the Antiochus within you will always try to clear space for foreign idols in the temple of your heart. But silence is not failure. It is an invitation to decide who truly rules that temple. And when you answer with faithful action, you turn silence into the beginning of a new era. History may write this period simply as the bridge between Old and New Testament, but in the record of the soul, I see it as the conception of a new sacred order. Just as a mother carries life unseen for months while it grows inside, so Judah, in this silence, carried a deeper, stronger faith, preparing for the coming of the Messiah. When you read this story, do not think it is only past. Let it shine on your silence today. For you may stand between two chapters, the old closed and the new not yet opened, hearing no clear guidance. Yet remember, it is precisely then that the seed of destiny is rooting. And if you keep faith in silence, you will witness a harvest beyond anything you imagined. Antiochus, embodiment of arrogance and tyranny, entered history as a shadow seeking to erase the identity of Judah. He not only forbade circumcision, Sabbath keeping, and reading or teaching the law, but also ordered every scroll burned, built altars to foreign gods in the very temple where the nation's soul met God, and offered defiled sacrifices to insult the faith of a community. That was the public face of external tyranny. Yet when I look deeper into the record of the soul, I see another layer, the Antiochus within each person, the one who stirs fear of rejection, feeds ambition, and invites assimilation with the crowd for easier living. It was this mechanism that led many in Judah to surrender identity for temporary safety, and you too carry an inner Antiochus whispering that if you conform, you will be accepted. If you abandon principle, life will be easier. If you pretend to be like others, you will not be mocked. And if you listen long enough, the inner temple will be abandoned and a strange altar built there. The external Antiochus could be defeated by war, but the inner Antiochus can only be recognized and freed by truth. I have often told people that the greatest darkness is not outside, but in compromise within. And when you accept the first small concession, you have opened the door for the whole army to march in. First Maccabees records the brutality of Antiochus, so later generations would know that light can survive under the harshest pressure. And when I read it, I see also a map of the inner life, for the real enemy is not only an ancient Greek king, but the daily choice between faithfulness and assimilation. I clearly see this mechanism in many souls. They come asking why peace is gone, why they feel alien to themselves, and the answer is the same: because they allowed the inner Antiochus to build an altar in the temple of their heart. The inner Antiochus needs no military. He only needs your consent to abandon piece by piece your sacred identity. Today, give up prayer. Tomorrow, give up discipline. Then give up principle until one day you awake to find your temple turned into a marketplace of ambition and fear. Deliverance begins when you dare to look and recognize this inner enemy. That is half the journey. The other half is feeding the flame of faith until it burns down the strange altar. I know that when facing external tyranny, people quickly see it and resist. But when tyranny comes from within, it wears the mask of reason. It will tell you that assimilation is survival. It will use the tone of wisdom to convince you that principles are unnecessary, that life will be smoother if you conform. And many fall to that voice. Yet I tell you, no, safety is great enough to exchange for the loss of identity. No acceptance by the crowd is worth more than the light of your soul. Antiochus defiled the temple in Jerusalem, but could not defile the inner temple of those willing to die rather than abandon faith. And that is proof that there is a ground that cannot be invaded unless you surrender it. I want you to understand that every time you compromise with fear, you erect a foreign altar in your soul. And every time you remain faithful in trial, you guard the flame in the Holy of Holies. First Maccabees is not only history, it is the mirror of your present, asking you what Antiochus within is demanding you to abandon identity. Is it the craving for recognition, the fear of insufficiency, the weariness that tempts you to yield? When you name them, you are halfway. The other half is choosing the covenant no matter the cost. For light is proven true only when tested by darkness. I have seen many souls stumble, yet when they rise and vow again to keep the ideal, the flame burns stronger than before. And you can do the same. Do not let the mask of Antiochus deceive you. Remember, he is strong only when you fear him. He lives only when you yield, but when you stand firm in the covenant, he vanishes. For true light does not need numbers, only faithfulness, and that faithfulness turns a small people into an unyielding force. At Modin, when the king's envoys set up an altar to foreign gods and demanded that all offer sacrifice to prove loyalty to Antiochus, Matathias, an old priest, stepped forward and did what no one expected. He refused openly before officials and people. He not only spoke words of refusal, but acted decisively. When he saw another Jew approach the altar in fear, he immediately killed the traitor, then killed the king's officer, and called all who still were faithful to the covenant to follow him into the wilderness. That was the moment that began the uprising, and also the moment that proved that a single, no large enough to compromise, can open the door of destiny. I see in his act the wholeness of ideal purpose and action. His ideal was fidelity to the covenant. His purpose was to keep the people from losing identity, and his action was to rise and step out of the safe zone. This shows that true strength does not lie in numbers, but in consistency between faith and deeds. I often say in readings that the soul is lifted only when the three elements ideal, purpose, and action are aligned. For if you have an ideal but the purpose strays, or you have a purpose but the action betrays, it all becomes meaningless. Matathias shows us the image of one who dared to pay with family and homeland to keep that consistency. He did not seek safety. He sought truth. And when truth becomes the center, the fear of loss no longer binds. I sense clearly that this is the flashpoint not only of history but of each soul, for every journey has a time when you must stand before your own false altar. That altar may be a habit that keeps you safe, a social position, or a relationship that forces you to betray your roots and then only affirm no keeps you from being assimilated. Matathias did what many would not dare. He not only spoke but acted with severity. That was a confession in blood that the covenant was more precious than his life. I see that through all ages there is always one who stands first, not because he is strongest, but because he can no longer be silent. And that very stand opens the way for others to follow. The people, seeing his act, understood that the path was not only to bow, but that there was another way, though full of danger, yet leading to freedom. When he called those zealous for the law to follow him, that was not only a call in history, but a call that echoes to you today. Are you willing to leave the safe zone to keep the light? Are you willing to say no to the false altars within? Do you dare leave the crowd to enter the wilderness of truth? I know the answer will shape your whole life. In my view, Matathias' act was not a sudden outburst, but the result of a lifetime of fidelity, reaching a peak. His anger was not mere temper, but the fire of righteousness flaring when the covenant was trampled. And that explains why his call moved hearts, for it came from the deepest place in the soul. Only one already burning in the fire of truth can ignite a movement. I want you to see that the beginning of liberation sometimes needs no army, but only one resolute soul. And Matathias was that soul. In the moment at Modin, he turned despair into hope, fear into drive, and silence into a call that rang through generations. What began as a small act became a flame that burned an empire. This is the law of life. The small seed contains the strength of a great forest. And when you dare to say no to the small compromises in your life, you are sowing a seed that can change your future and the future of those after you. When I behold that image and vision, I know that every soul has a Modin moment, a time to decide to keep the covenant or lose oneself. And when you choose to keep the covenant, you join the ranks of those who know that true freedom never comes from assimilation, but from fidelity. Even at the cost of all, leaving Modin, after the call of Matathias, a small band stepped into the wilderness carrying faith and resolve. They left houses, fields, and all the safety of the city to choose the thorny path of the hills. From that a small people was born, not defined by numbers, but by the strength of fidelity. These people chose truth over compromise, the covenant over submission, and the uncertainty of freedom over the comfort of slavery. The wilderness in Scripture is always the training ground of the soul. There, the noisy rhythms that dull reason are gone. The hollow rituals that mask inner emptiness are gone. Only the bare essentials remain between human and God, and in that harsh place, fidelity is honed into true strength. I have seen in many souls that when they are forced to leave the safe zone, that is when they discover their real resources. So it was with the small people of Matathias. As they climbed the mountains, lived on sparse meals, slept in cold mist, and evaded the soldiers of Antiochus, their faith did not fade, but burned brighter. They became guerrilla warriors, not only with sword and spear, but with inner endurance. They struck and withdrew, hid and appeared unexpectedly, confounding the enemy, not by physical power, but by certainty that they fought for what is right. I want you to see clearly that wilderness is not only a place, it is a spiritual state when what is familiar is stripped away, when you must live without relying on comfort, When each day is a test of survival, then your soul learns to distinguish what is truly needed and what is mere burden. You will see that many things you thought indispensable were only a shell. You will see that strength lies not in what you stockpile, but in the readiness of the heart to keep the light even when the hands are empty. I have often told many that entering the wilderness of the soul is the chance to return to essentials. Simplicity opens the way to holiness. That small people learned this in blood and tears. Their everyday testified that survival does not come from numbers, but from perseverance and faith. They were not a formally trained army, yet zeal itself made them a force. The enemy feared. In this time, I see a practice that can help you connect with their spirit. Call it the hill exercise in the heart. Each day give 10 minutes to disconnect from the surrounding noise. Close your eyes and choose a clear ideal, perhaps fidelity, perhaps mercy, perhaps truth. Breathe in and whisper, I return. Breathe out and whisper, I keep the covenant. As simple as that. Yet if you persist, you will sense the strength of a small people rising within, just as Matathias gathered the zealous from everywhere into a strong little band. You will see daily small consistencies gathered into unshakable power. The truth is, you do not need an external Antiochus to know the wilderness. You can enter it today when you cut away the noise and decide to face the bareness of the soul. There you will find the resource to live true. A small people was born in the wilderness, and from that few, the uprising became a flame that burned an empire. Their strength did not lie in numbers, but in knowing why they fought and being ready to pay the price. I tell you that if you want to know your true strength, look at what you are willing to keep when every comfort is taken away. The small people in the wilderness chose to keep faith, and that choice made them great in the eyes of God. After the death of Matathias, the flame of the movement seemed to waver. But then Judas, his son, rose and became the leader of that small band. And from that moment, history knew him as the Hammer, not because of the cruelty of violence, but because of the power of a frequency of courage that resounded enough to dissolve chaos. Judas carried within him a rare union of steadfast faith and strategic wisdom. He knew the enemy was more numerous, stronger, and better armed. But he also knew that fear was the most dangerous weapon. Therefore, the first thing he did was to turn fear into spiritual strength. I see in vision that Judas appeared as the archetype of the guardian of the temple. He kept discipline in thought, not allowing doubt to creep in. He kept clarity in prayer, knowing that victory would not come from numbers, but from the hand of God. And he kept flexibility in tactics to continually surprise the enemy. He was proof that one who aligns ideal purpose and action can become a pillar for an entire people. When I read the record of Judas, I see he was not a warrior seeking personal glory, but one who lived for a higher ideal. His ideal was not to destroy the enemy, but to guard the covenant and restore the holiness of the temple. Thus he turned each battle into a prayer of blood and sweat, and each victory into proof that light can never be extinguished. Judas understood that discipline was not a burden, but a mercy for the future. For by discipline his people could endure, while the enemy seemed unbeatable. In guerrilla battles, he trained his soldiers with clarity, never vague about the goal, never straying from faith. He always reminded them that the battlefield was not only out there, but within the heart of each person. A warrior must conquer himself before conquering the foe. I see this reflects an eternal rule. If you cannot master your thoughts, you will soon fall victim to fear and doubt. The hammer was not only a name given to Judas by the edge of the sword, but the frequency he released whenever he stood among his small army. His decisiveness shattered fear, his steadfastness dissolved disorder, and his certainty overcame even armies many times stronger. In spiritual sight, I see Judas as a drum resounding in the hearts of men. Whenever he called out, remember what God has done for the Father. Remember the Red Sea parted. Remember Jericho fell, and the people felt their faith rise stronger than weapons. When I speak of Judas, I want you to understand that he is not only a figure in an ancient book, but a living image of your own capacity. When you keep discipline, when you keep prayer, and when you face chaos with resolve, you too can become a hammer, breaking the chains in your life. This strength does not lie in how many follow you, but in the frequency you emit. That frequency is either trembling or resolute, either divided or seamless. Judas chose the frequency of resolve and thereby turned the course of history. Those who followed him knew they were following a leader who did not live for himself, but for the covenant, and that made them ready to give their lives. True leadership is proved not by commands, but by presence. And Judas had that presence. When he appeared in the field, the enemy trembled, knowing this adversary fought not by fear, but by faith. I want you to ask yourself what frequency you are releasing in your life. Are you sowing chaos with constant doubt, or sowing resolve with steadfast fidelity? Judas shows that when one person holds firm to his frequency, an entire community can regain strength. The hammer is the image for you to mirror yourself, for within each person there is a Judas waiting to awaken. And when you begin to train discipline in thought, when you choose clear prayer, and when you keep flexible strategy, you will find yourself releasing a frequency strong enough to defeat the Antiochus figures in your life. Judas did this not by inborn might, but by the daily choice to keep the covenant. That same choice now waits for you. The battle at Emmaus was a defining moment, showing the strength of a small people aligned with faith rather than relying on numbers or weapons. The Seleucid army came with overwhelming force, armed fully and confident. They would crush Judas and his followers, but Judas chose a tactic both bold and wise. He split his forces, leaving a small group to distract, while leading the majority on a night march to circle behind the enemy camp. When dawn rose, the Seleucid troops rushed to strike the empty position, thinking they had trapped the rebels. But they did not know Judas and his men stood at their back ready to strike. The surprise attack threw the camp into panic disorder, spread quickly, and numerical advantage lost its value because pride had turned into brittle overconfidence. I see in vision that this was not only a clash of swords, but a meeting of two frequencies. One side trusted outward power, the other trusted unseen guidance. And when frequency aligns with faith, chaos dissolves. The lesson of Emmaus is that victory does not come from the strength of the arm, but from the union of intellect and intuition, of discipline and prayer. Judas knew he could not win by direct collision, so he chose the path of least friction while staying true to the ideal, and that was the wisdom of an aligned soul. Then came Beth, another pivotal point where the Seleucid army came larger than ever, confident they would crush the revolt. But Judas used the rough terrain as advantage, cutting the enemy's supply lines. He did not rush into frontal confrontation, but let the arrogance of the opponent lead them step by step into the trap. The enemy was worn down, and the faith of the small people was strengthened more than ever. At Beth, Judas proved that victory comes not from sudden force, but from patience and the ability to wait for the enemy to expose weakness. It was proof that pride always collapses, while alignment with faith always stands. Seeing the two battles together, I see an unchanging law. Those who place ideal purpose and action into one rhythm rise above the strength of any Antiochus. They may be few, they may lack weapons, but they hold what the enemy never can, a resolve nurtured by faith. Both Emmaus and Beth became evidence that a small people can challenge an empire many times stronger when they choose the path aligned with faith. I want you to see that these battles do not belong only to history, but to your life. Whenever you face a trial that seems too great, you are at Emmaus or Beth. You may be tempted to confront directly by your own strength, but the truth is victory comes only when you review your ideal set, a clear goal, and choose the path of least friction. I suggest a practice map before each great battle of life. First, recall your ideal, write it down or speak it aloud so you remember what you fight for. second set, a simple measurable goal. Do not be swept by a vague ambition for a clear goal. It's a lamp in the night. Third, choose the path of least friction. Do not take winding routes. Choose the short way suited to the moment, for victory loves the short road but needs long endurance. These 3 steps may sound simple, but they are the very map. Judas lived at Emmaus and Beth, and by them he and his small people proved that not weapons, not numbers, but alignment brings victory. When you begin to live this way, you will see yourself releasing the same frequency of resolve as Judas. And then you will realize that every time you keep faith and walk in wisdom, you too are writing the next chapter of First Maccabees. And perhaps the most powerful truth is that faith itself is a strategy. It is not blind passivity, but a disciplined alignment that opens the way where brute force cannot. Judas could have chosen despair before overwhelming odds, yet he chose vision. He saw the weak point in pride. He saw the way through the terrain. He saw that the heart of the people was the strongest weapon of all. And so Emmaus and Beth shine as testimonies not only of miraculous deliverance, but of the union of human creativity with divine trust. I want you to understand that this union is available to you in your work, in your family, in every unseen battle. You do not need to carry the weight of impossible numbers. You need only to align your purpose with faith and let wisdom guide your steps. There will always be a Seleucid army in life larger than you can count. But there will also always be a path like Emmaus or Beth if you quiet yourself enough to listen, if you trust enough to act. And when you do, you will not only win a battle, but you will be transformed into a witness that faith is stronger than empires, that resolve born of prayer and clarity outlasts all weapons, and that every trial is a hidden invitation to prove again that pride falls while faith endures. Therefore, the cleansing was not only construction work, but an act of healing. They tore down the defiled altar built for foreign gods and replaced it with a new altar according to the law. They cleared away every trace of insult. Each stone, each vessel was renewed, and in that moment the soul of Judah was restored to wholeness. But what made this story legendary was the lamp of oil that should have lasted only one day, burning bright for 8 days until new oil could be prepared. That event is remembered as the origin of Hanukkah. And in my intuition, I know it was not only a miracle of fuel, but the evidence of a sacred law. When you remove what is unclean and set your heart in fidelity, the invisible resource will sustain your light beyond all human measure. Man can calculate limits, but God is not bound. And the faithful soul is always upheld in ways unexpected. I see clearly that the outer temple is only the image of the inner one. Each time you remove the false idols within, you are performing the same cleansing Judas once did in Jerusalem. The oil that burned 8 days did not only light the holy chamber, but reminded that the light within you can also endure far beyond what you imagine when you remove what defiles. I want you to see that cleansing the inner temple is not a vague ritual, but a concrete act. Begin by naming 3 habits that dim your light. It may be comparison that breeds discontent. It may be bitterness that closes your heart, or delay that makes you miss the moment of growth. Take 8 days as 8 steps of restoration. Each day remove une fausse idole. The first day silence your phone for an hour to regain stillness. The second day write 5 lines of gratitude to replace bitterness with thanksgiving. The third day apologize to someone to unlock the closed heart, and so on. Each day you will find your light lasting longer than you thought. Oil seems to run out quickly, but the unseen strength sustains it when you are faithful in cleansing. The lesson of Hanukkah is not only a religious memory, but a reminder to every generation that the light of God is never extinguished if there is a people willing to guard the flame, even with the last drop of oil. I see in vision that the miracle was not in the amount of oil, but in the courage to light it, though it seemed insufficient. For the very act begun in faith opened the door to divine intervention. Many wait until they have enough before they begin. They wait for more energy, more time, more certainty before they step. But this story teaches that you must use what you have, and the light will endure beyond your reckoning. When I see Judas and his people lighting the lamp in the temple, I see not only physical flame, but the affirmation that God was still with them, and that true faith never runs dry. That lesson is for you today. You may feel your strength depleted. You may think you are not enough to continue. You may believe your faith is too small. But remember that if you dare to light it, God will keep it burning longer than you thought. Many times I have seen in the record of souls that one small spark is enough to open a chain of miracles, for the issue is not the amount of oil, but the faith to ignite. When you cleanse the inner temple and keep the covenant, you will see that the inner light not only endures, but shines to others. Just as Judas's lamp became the light of a people, your light can be comfort and hope for others in darkness. Remember, the true temple is not Jerusalem of stone, but your heart. And if you keep it pure, the lamp within will never go out. Judas fell at Elasa, and the echo of that event struck the nation like a wound. Those who had placed all hope in him now had to face the truth that even the hammer could fall before a mighty empire. Yet I see clearly his death was not the end, but the passing of the flame from one hand to many. Jonathan, his brother, rose to lead and kept the movement alive. Jonathan knew not only how to wield the sword, but also how to wield the balance of diplomacy. He bargained with neighboring powers, signed treaties, played the game of balance to preserve the survival of the small nation. He understood that not every battle must be fought with weapons. Sometimes flexibility opened the way to life, and by that the cause did not vanish in darkness. Then Simon succeeded and became the architect of autonomy. He established the Hasmonean dynasty, turning the dream of their fathers into reality. For a time, Judah held its own independence with king structure and authority in their ancestral land. The people rejoiced, believing the dream fulfilled. But as I read deeper into the current of the soul, I see power carried its hidden cracks. A structure once built can shelter, but can also consume the soul if the ideal is not guarded. The Hasmoneans became a dynasty with palace throne and army, but the spirit of Matathias and Judas grew dim. What began as a covenant movement turned into political mechanism. Negotiations must be made, power must be preserved, interests protected, and in that place darkness seeped. Inner division and tangled diplomacy grew. The collective soul began to forget why they first rose. I've often said in readings that to achieve structure is not the same as to preserve spirit, for structure is always a double-edged sword. It can guard the light but also obscure it if not kept pure. Spirit is what nourishes structure, but structure can never replace spirit. The Hasmoneans built a dynasty that lasted nearly a century, but at last they too fell into inner strife, and the very structure they built opened the door for foreign power to return. I want you to see this not only as history, but as a warning to every soul. For you too may build your own structures. It may be career. It may be family. It may be reputation. And you think that structure will protect you. But if you allow it to consume the spirit, it will drain the life from your soul. The lesson here is to always guard the ideal so that the structure serves the soul and not devours it. You must continually return to the first question. Why did I step on this path? Do I still hold the same faithful purpose as at the beginning? Am I letting the structure become a shackle instead of a tool? Jonathan and Simon strove to carry Judas's legacy. They kept the flame but also faced the lure of power. And history shows decline always begins when men forget the first ideal. A movement born of the fire of covenant may die in the cold of the very power it built. This is the cycle many souls must learn to break. I see the message reaching you now. Look at your structures. Ask if they are serving or swallowing you. Remember, true strength does not lie in throne or army, but in the flame of fidelity kept when all else shakes. Power is only a shell, but spirit is light. If you lose the spirit, then structure, however strong, is only a stone tomb. The lesson of the Hasmoneans reminds you that the real work of the soul is not building grand structures, but keeping the first light from going out. And if you do that, every structure will become an instrument, not a chain. I also want you to see that decline does not come in one sudden fall, but in gradual shifts, small compromises that seem harmless, treaties signed without prayer, alliances chosen without discernment, words spoken to preserve image rather than truth. These tiny cracks widen until the whole foundation shakes. This is why vigilance is the duty of every leader and every soul, to return daily to the fire of the covenant and ask again, am I still aligned with the light? Am I still guarding the flame? Or have I let it flicker for the sake of comfort? Jonathan balanced diplomacy, and Simon achieved autonomy, but even they could not escape the creeping shadow of power, and that is why their story still speaks today, for every age faces the same danger. That zeal becomes machinery, that faith becomes formality, that covenant becomes institution. And when that shift is complete, what was once living turns into stone. The spirit departs, and only the husk remains. The soul that understands this will guard against it. The soul that remembers that spirit precedes structure will not be ensnared by its own creations. And this is why I tell you, after the flame comes the test of endurance. After the victory comes the test of stewardship. After the throne comes the warning of power. And only those who continually return to the first light will endure. The Hasmoneans remind us that power can never preserve itself. Only fidelity can. Power always decays, but faith renews. And if you hold the flame, no empire can enslave you. No structure can consume you. No throne can corrupt you. For the soul anchored in the covenant knows that the true kingdom is not built by stone, but by spirit. One of the images most deeply engraved in the memory of the soul that I have ever read is the story of the mother and her 7 sons. When Antiochus sought to crush the spirit of the people of Judah by forcing them to betray the law and eat what was forbidden, he met a wall of iron made of fidelity. Each son was led out one by one. They were tortured. They were promised rewards if they would submit, but none of them chose to sigh and survive by losing identity. They fell one after another. Yet they did not fall in fear. They fell in faith that there is resurrection, that the Creator would return to them what they had offered. The eldest spoke clearly that we are ready to die rather than break the law of our fathers. That was not a slogan, but a truth, shining in every glance. And when the youngest stood before King Antiochus, the tyrant used every sweet word and promised wealth and power to lure him. But the boy, encouraged by his mother, answered with steadfast silence and accepted death, with a smile in his eyes. The mother did not wail and did not despair. She watched each of her children endure suffering and encouraged them with a strange calm. She reminded them to hold firm, because this death was not the end, but the gate that leads to true life. I see in this story another miracle, not the miracle of oil that burned 8 days, but the miracle of a faith stronger than bodily pain. The body may be seized, tortured, and taken away, but the ideal cannot be imprisoned when you still choose it. And the mother with her 7 sons engraved that truth for every generation. I want you to understand that this story is not only a religious legend, but a mirror for your life today. Every time you face the temptation to betray principle, every time you are threatened with loss if you remain faithful, you also stand in that room where the mother and the 7 sons stood. Your choice may not require your life, but it requires honesty. It requires steadiness. It requires you to hold the ideal, even when the price is the loss of immediate gain. I often ask souls who come to me, what in your life is worth suffering loss without losing your soul? If the answer is nothing, then you have lived like an orphan. For a mature soul, always has one thing. It will never sell at any price. The mother in this story proved that faith is not speech, but a decision kept to the end. She did not protect her children by bowing. She protected them by urging them to be faithful unto death, so that they would receive true life. I see this as the law of life, that fidelity always demands a price, and the greater the price, the more enduring the light. For the blood of the steadfast becomes seed for the next generation. Without those deaths, the people of Judah would have easily dissolved into the Greek Sea. But that painful choice preserved the root. I say to you, learn this pattern of quiet courage. You do not need to shout to prove fidelity. You only need to stand still and not step back before pressure. When you hold firm in this way, you will see that death, whether literal or symbolic, has no authority over you. You simply pass from one room to another, and your ideal crosses every threshold without being confined. The question for you today is whether you have something worth suffering loss without losing your soul. If not, then find it, for when you find it, you will know that no pressure can break you. The mother and the 7 sons left a reminder that fidelity is not measured by years lived, but by the courage to die in the right way. And until this day, that reminder still resounds within you. Moses led the people out of Egypt and made covenant with God on Sinai. Joshua led the people into the promised land and reconsecrated that land to the presence of the Creator. David took a small stone and faced the giant and proved that courage in worship is greater than the power of weapons. When I read the record of Judas Maccabeus, I see in him the reflection of all 3 archetypes. He is like Moses leading the people out of the yoke of assimilation. He is like Joshua restoring the holiness of the temple. And he is like David daring to face a mighty army by trusting the hand of God. Judas is not a figure standing apart. He is a link in the chain of souls, called to guard the covenant. And for that reason, his story opens a thread that connects to the New Testament. When Jesus entered the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, in the Temple of Jerusalem, that was not a random cultural event. It was a confirmation that the flame kindled in the time of Judas still burned and shone in the time of the Messiah. Jesus stood in the temple that had been cleansed by Judas and his brothers, and from that place he spoke of eternal life and of the sheep kept by the Good Shepherd. This is the living line between First Maccabees and the New Testament to show that history is never separated, but is a continuous current. Moses opened the door for the covenant. Joshua guarded the land. David lit the fire of faith. Judas carried the flame forward, and Jesus fulfilled it with the new covenant. When you read First Maccabees, you are not only reading a piece of history left outside, you are reading a mirror that reflects the archetypes that have appeared many times and will appear in your own life. I often repeat one principle, that ideal purpose and action must align. And when you look at Judas, you will see that he lived exactly on those 3 axes. His ideal was fidelity to the covenant. His purpose was the restoration of holiness. His action was to fight not only with the sword, but with absolute trust. The question I want you to carry as you read First Maccabees is the question of Cayce. What is your ideal? Does your purpose truly match that ideal? And what do your daily actions prove? Many say they have an ideal, but the real purpose they follow is small advantage. Many set a high purpose, but their daily actions betray what they proclaim. The truth is, only when these 3 unite do you become a Judas in your own life. And then the light you send forth becomes a frequency strong enough to dissolve chaos. I see clearly that the stories of Moses, Joshua, David, and Judas are not for distant admiration, but for you to recognize that you are also called to enter the same pattern. The Moses in you invites you to leave inner slavery. The Joshua in you calls you to reconsecrate the land of the soul that has been defiled. The David in you encourages you to face the giants of fear. And the Judas in you urges you to become the hammer that breaks assimilation, to keep the covenant. All of this leads to Jesus within you, who closes the old covenants and opens the new covenant of undying love When he stood in the temple at the Feast of Dedication, it was a sign that the light never goes out. Oil that seemed empty still burns because ideal purpose and action were kept by many generations. Ask yourself today, what is my ideal? Is it truly pure or only a mask I wear to please others? Does my purpose match that ideal, or does it circle around personal convenience? Do my daily actions prove what I confess, or do I only speak without living? If you answer honestly, you will know where you stand in the flow of the biblical threads, and you can choose to become its continuation. I see that when a person dares to align in this way, he becomes a living temple where the light never goes out. Just as the lamp of Hanukkah burned beyond the oil human measure, let your life also become proof that the light of faith surpasses the limits of circumstance. And then you will understand that the story of Moses, Joshua, David, Judas, and Jesus is no longer old tale, but the story being written within your own soul. Reading the book within is a work no one can do for you. For First Maccabees is not only written in words on paper, but also written in the heartbeat of every soul. I have seen in the records of many that they know many stories but never live them, and so their light fades. But when a person dares to read the book within each page, opens into a concrete action in daily life, the first step is to set an ideal, write a short sentence that contains what you want to stand firm in. It could be faithful to the covenant, or trunked in with Jauk, or any phrase, so long as it is an arrow aimed at the center of your soul. Do not let it remain only in your mind. Write it and place it where your eyes meet it often, such as on your desk or at your door. For what the eyes see again and again carves into the subconscious, and the subconscious will then draw you into that ideal. Many fail not because they have no faith, but because they have no clear ideal to anchor them in the storm. Next comes daily small actions. I say that oil for the lamp does not need to be much, but must be steady. Choose one act as oil for your flame. It could be 5 minutes of prayer in the morning. It could be visiting one weak person each week. It could be a hidden gift of charity given without anyone knowing. Consider it one drop of oil each day to keep the flame from dying. For light does not need to blaze at once. It needs to endure through the nights. Then comes regular cleansing. Each week, choose one false altar in your mind and dismantle it. It could be the habit of checking social media 10 times an hour. It could be the sharp words you speak to protect your ego. It could be the self-belittling thoughts that say, I am not enough, I cannot. All are strange altars that have taken place in the temple of the heart. And dim the light. Dismantle them one by one. Not hurried, but steady. And you will see the temple within becoming clearer. Then comes the Emmaus strategy. When you have a major task to present or a battle to enter, do not rush headlong, like the enemy rushing into an empty camp. First, prepare silence. Sit down and let the mind grow still, so that intuition has space to speak. When quietness becomes the foundation, you will know from where and how to strike. This strategy is not trickery, but the union of intellect and intuition. What Judas did at Emmaus is what you may do in every inner and outer battle. Finally, keep the Hanukkah flame. When energy sinks low, when oil seems not enough, you will be tempted to give up. But remember, little oil is still enough. Slow the pace, reduce the goal, but do not stop. For the light always finds a way to burn longer than you thought. So long as you keep it lit. I have seen many souls burst with enthusiasm, but fade quickly because they demanded too much of themselves, while the secret lay in steady, small fidelity. The Hanukkah flame was not the fire of instant greatness, but the miracle of endurance beyond natural limit. Let the book within you be read each day by setting a clear ideal, feeding the lamp with small acts, cleansing regularly, fighting with wise silence, and keeping the flame through endurance. When you do so, you will see that the story of First Maccabees is not only of the past, it is being written in your own life. And each page is not stored in any library, but in the actions and choices you make each day First Maccabees was never only military chronicle. It is the theology of courage and the practice of fidelity. Every battle, every loss, every miracle of oil that burned 8 days was not to boast of weapons, but to remind that true strength comes from the unseen. When I look back over the whole story, from Matathias saying the first no at Modin to Judas, the hammer leading the small band into impossible battles, from the cleansing of the temple to the steadfast deaths of the mother and her 7 sons, I see one current flowing through, fidelity proved by concrete acts each day, and that is what still lives with you now. For today's culture also demands assimilation, also encourages you to let go of your root, to survive more easily. First Maccabees teaches that you can stand upright without turning to stone. You can fight without losing your heart. That lesson is more urgent than ever, because Antiochus is not only in the Chronicles. Antiochus also wears the mask of the desire for approval, the fear of being left out, and the small daily compromises. Each time you see and refuse at Antiochus, you are keeping the flame of the inner temple. The oil in you may be little, your strength may be thin, but if you light it, it will burn longer than you expect. For that is the sacred law of fidelity. I want you to hear this as a deep echo that the soul is not called to ease, the soul is called to fidelity. And from fidelity strength arises. When I read the records of many, I see their common sorrow is not knowing what they live for. Ideals vague, purposes scattered, actions divided, and the result is a withering soul. First Maccabees stands as mirror for you to ask, what is my ideal? Does my purpose truly match that ideal? And what do my daily actions prove? If you dare answer honestly, you will know where you stand in the covenant journey, and you may set your direction anew. The Hanukkah lamp that burned 8 days speaks to you that little oil is enough if there is fidelity. And so it is with you. You do not need perfection. You do not need multitudes to follow. You do not need every condition to be favorable. You only need steadfastness with the ideal you choose, and turn it into daily concrete act. Begin with a short reminder placed where you see it each day. Feed the flame with small deeds, and remove the strange altars crowding your heart. When you do so, you will see that the small nation within you becomes strong. You will see that the inner temple shines regardless of how many Antiochuses are outside. And if you ask me the final message of this whole story, I will say this. Choose the ideal, set the purpose, and make each day into a small act that proves the covenant. When you do this, you will carry forward the flame of Matathias, of Judas, of the mothers and children who died, and you will know that the current still flows through you. The flame never dies, and your life becomes a new page in the book that never closes,